The third lens we'd like you to look at is what we call the Marxist lens, and this derives its name from Karl Marx, one of the founders of modern-day communism. He wrote the Communist Manifesto, and in that manifesto, that book, Karl Marx was criticizing governments where there are exceptional power differences, and oftentimes these power differences showed themselves in terms of class and who has money. So upper, middle, and lower class. So the Marxist lens asks readers of texts to look at the power lens. Who has power? Who doesn't? Now, oftentimes we're going to see that power is related to money. Therefore, who has money and who doesn't? Who has power? Who doesn't? Who is rich and who is quote-unquote poor? Just because a character has a lot of money and may be financially rich doesn't mean that they are morally rich. They could be completely morally corrupt. Meanwhile, you could have a character who has no money at all, yet somehow rises to control the situation. What does that mean in terms of the theme when you have rich characters who are morons or poor characters who have the best moral compass, for example? So how do we look through this Marxist lens? Number one, who has power and who doesn't? And I think there you can break it down into a couple subcategories. What is obvious power? Okay, teachers' power over student, presidents' power over electorate, kings' power over the subjects. But what about the surprising elements of power? Does a class clown have power in a classroom? And the answer is yes. It's different from what the teacher may have or what the student athlete of the month may have, but the class clown does have some power in that relationship. What does that do? How does that change the theme of a text? Who has money? Who doesn't? And again, look at it obviously, literally. Who has more cash than somebody else? What happens if you have somebody who is exceptionally poor, who is able to rise through the ranks? What role does this power or money or social class play? And then what happens as a result of these differences? I think a text would be completely different if the rich people were in charge, they followed all the rules, were morally perfect, and then the story ended. That doesn't make a lot of sense. There's no conflict in there. What's the theme of that story? And then how would the theme of that text be different if we had morally corrupt upper class, if we had socially upwardly mobile poorer people who are figuring it out and bettering themselves and they become better leaders? What's the difference in the message of those two texts? What's the theme of those two? Regardless, if you are examining power relationships, that's going to be the Marxist lens. All right, the fourth lens we'd like you to look at is what we call the Formalist lens, or Formalism. This one's kind of hard to describe, but basically it's looking at the text as a text. Meaning is discovered through close reading. That we look at words, we look at word patterns, we look at similes, metaphors. We look at the text as a text. We exclude outside influences. We try to block out when it was written, or the gender of the author, or the power relationships. We try to exclude all of those and just look at the structure itself. And so how do we look through this formalist lens? If we are looking at the text just as a text, the idea is if it doesn't happen in the book, in the characters, then it doesn't count. So this is where we're going to use all of those great literary terms and lessons that we've talked about all year. This is where we look for similes, metaphors, hyperbole, onomatopoeia, personification. We look for allusions. We look for satire. We look for changes in character. We follow the plot map. We look at the hero's journey. We look at parallels in structure. Does this take place over 3 days? Maybe it's biblical. Does this take place with a lot of blacks and whites as color descriptors of our characters? Maybe it's a good and evil type thing. But we really look at the words, the sentences, the structure of the piece itself to create some meaning. We're trying to exclude everything else. We're trying to pretend, to put it in another way, that this text was created in a vacuum, which is weird because texts aren't. They are created by human beings. They are created in a certain time period. They are created with a certain social idea in mind. But if you're looking through the formalist lens, you're trying to block all of those out and just look at the text as a text. The last lens that we may at times ask you to look through is what we call the reader response lens. And this looks truly at you as a reader and how you respond to the text. Individual meaning is pulled from this text as you read it. If it means something to you because of your background knowledge and your situation in life and your language history and your color of hair history or whatever, then that's what it means. That may be completely different from the person sitting next to you. Perhaps you are a 14-year-old girl with green hair who loves to do rodeo. Fine. You may read this novel differently from the 15-year-old boy who likes to fix cars, has no hair, and speaks 8 languages. However you as reader respond to this text because of who you are, that is reader response. And I think just naturally, this is how we read books. When we pick up Harry Potter, we get out of it whatever we want to get out of it. If you really want to focus on how great Hermione is, because that's who you focus on, great. If you want to focus on the classic struggle between good and evil because that's what you've read in other books, fine. If you want to read for whatever other reason because that's who you are, then so be it. That is reader response. And so how do you look through the reader response lens? Seriously, just read it. Whatever is going on in your head as you are reading it, if you are actively reading it, not fake reading it, then you are doing the reader response lens. However you think about that text, however you interpret it, then that's going to be accurate for you. I mean, granted, there is always the idea of authorial intent. We can't read The Giving Tree and say, I interpret the tree to be an alien, because that's what I think in reader response. You might be kind of going outer limits a little bit. But if you look at the tree in The Giving Tree and think that it's a mother figure or a friend figure or just abstract love, then that's what it means to you, based on your history, your background knowledge, etc. And so as you bring your own thoughts, moods, and experiences, you are reading through that reader response lens. So what's the point? Why do we care about lenses? Why would we want to focus on the gender issues or the power issues or the similes? The point of all of our reading is to help us get to theme. What is the author's message with this particular text? Sometimes those themes are exceptionally obvious. Sometimes if we change our lens slightly, we can see it through a different perspective that we don't normally read from, and that helps us get to the so what question. So what that all the female characters in this follow the gender stereotypes? Okay, what does that mean? What's the author trying to say by that? So what all of the male characters in this tend to like art? Okay, so what's that mean? So what that the powerful come from the poorest of the people? So what that every other page begins with a simile? We have to A, identify it at the literal level, and then B, make that mental jump and try and move to that interpretive level and go, so what? What's the point? Why would the author be writing characters like this, or setting up the setting like this, or creating color imagery like this? What does that matter? And our goal is, how does that relate to theme? How does that relate to the message of the text? That's about it for this podcast in terms of setting up what the lenses are and basically how we read through them. Needless to say, we will be practicing with these a lot throughout the year, applying them to different levels of text. Of course, we're going to start with the visual, perhaps some small video clips, move into poetry, move into short story, and then move into our novels. But for right now, if you have any questions about what the lenses are, what goes in each one, those are perfect things to bring into class. We will try and get those answered for you, and then we will help you apply those immediately to new texts when we see you next. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you soon.